So yeah, this book is by Kelly and Zach Weinersmith, A City on Mars. Can we settle space? Should we settle space? And have we really thought this through? Zach Weinersmith is best known for being the cartoonist who created Saturday Morning Breakfast cereal webcomic. His wife, Kelly Weinersmith, is a scientist, adjunct faculty member in biosciences at Rice University. So we've got some science, we've got some humor, we've got a couple of nerds who wrote this book. My expertise on this topic is basically this book. I don't have any extra information. Tor, I think, has a lot more information. We're kind of going to be back and forthing it today, talking about the whole idea of space settlement, why we might or might not want to do it, what the complexities of it are. Tor, did you want to do any intro here?
Yes, I want to set the stage on what I see as the biggest controversy. Let me see how to do this. Share screen. And it's the idea, my gosh, this is harder than I thought. Are you a space cowboy? Because all my life, starting in I was born in 1964, and by 1968, I remember that space and the Apollo missions were a hot topic. But this led me to ask three important questions, because I see a trivialization of the radiation risk. I see that artificial gravity is not a concern. You look at Elon Musk. And I say, is the real motivation to go where no one has gone before and plant a flag? So I'd like you to ask, whatever you hear, I'd like you to view it through the lens. Are we discussing a space cowboy or girl? Are we actually being in the realm of practical civilization?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because as we'll see in this, there are a lot of complexities and problems that we really haven't addressed, haven't put much research and money into yet, that we're going to need to answer before we can have a space settlement anywhere. So why don't we start off with Tor, why should we go to space? Just like top level ideas here.
Space, unlike the Earth, which has thousands of years of warfare, of inequality, of conflict, of scarcity, in space you offer a fresh start, because inherently you have to be community focused. If you go into space, it's you against space. There's no point in having war. You would want to leave all that behind. There's no scarcity because of the resources around. If you get into space and you get in there in a sustainable way, there are resources all over the place. So you've removed the reasons for conflict and inequality in space. You get to set up your idea of a utopia. That's not to say it would be perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than what we got right now.
So I think that take assumes a lot about how we set up space settlement and exploration. Specifically, the idea that we won't be fighting over resources assumes that either we can get all the resources we need at the new location, which for all the locations we have even potential access to at this point, that would not be true, or that we can have easy free trade with Earth, which is also in question, especially the farther we go away. It's pretty hard to get stuff back and forth from Mars. In addition, as the Weinersmiths keep coming back to in their book, we're still humans. We've still got all the problems of being human. Usually people are not fighting over land per se. They're fighting over particular land, or they're fighting over access to particular resources. And I don't think that's going to go away if we go to space. We're still going to have religious differences. We're still going to have conflict between nations, even if the nations manage to cooperate enough to collaborate on an expedition, or if the expedition is somehow not affected by that conflict, it's still going to end up being a factor in Earth conflicts that could end up even exacerbating the risks of war. So are there other reasons we should go to space? Because I think those are arguable.
Well, the honored reason is to expand our awareness. The same reasons that people migrated to the West Coast, space is the next logical frontier. And the idea that, do we really only want to be confined to Earth when we have the technology and the ability to colonize other planets, asteroids, even other solar systems? It's a matter to say, is that inevitable or is that just theoretical? And I say it's inevitable.
Well, we don't have to go to space, but I agree that we're gonna. And I agree that we should. Not necessarily fast and not necessarily for the reasons that some people are arguing, but we definitely should expand out into space, learn from it, learn what resources are out there and how we can use them. So let's look at like big picture arguments. We should go because there's stuff out there to learn. We should go because there are resources out there to be gained. We should go because it's a new start. It'll give us like a way to be humans without being our national conflicts. I'm pretty skeptical about that one. Probably the two best arguments are, it is freaking awesome. We want to go to space because it's awesome to think about going to space and having all these possibilities, lots of new stuff to learn, lots of space to expand and explore. And the other really big one is ultimately we don't want to be stuck on one rock. If something terrible happens to this rock, all humanity is going to be gone. If we get any enormous impact from some asteroid tumbling through space, we could, that might be it for all the life in the universe for all we know. So it'd be really good to get on a few other places, but it's going to take a really, really long time and a whole lot of work to have that be anything like practical. That's not going to be a near-term thing. Right now, anything that we do on other celestial bodies is really dependent on infrastructure on Earth, and we're not going to get around that anytime soon. We're looking at least decades before that would be practicable. Joe, any comments on that?
I debate that to say things could happen a lot sooner than, and let me kind of lay this out. That they came up with a, let me get the right slide here. Oh, it disappeared. It's a, there it is. A team of 5 guys spent 2 weeks and using AI to develop this rocket engine. And I just hold this up as a case because when NASA designed it, the first rocket engines, they had teams of 1,000 people, and it took them years. And now it's getting down to 5 guys, 2 weeks, and a 3D metal printing, and you get this. And you notice the twisting design, it's more efficient. It has better heat conductivity. And there's a number of improvements. I just look at that and say, wow. So the cost of doing these things is plummeting. And we're entering a new space age because it used to be you had to have $100 billion. Now it's getting into $10 billion. Now it's getting down to $1 billion. And that puts it in the range of a lot of rich people or organizations.
Absolutely. Our rocket science is getting better and better. I totally agree with you on that one. I think, though, that people tend to underestimate all the other problems. So let's look at what some of those are. Let's start talking about life support, health, and medical care, first of all. We actually don't know a lot about how to keep people alive and healthy in space in a long-term way. Nobody has ever been in space much longer than a year. And if we're talking about people living in a non-Earth environment, that is vastly different from being on the space shuttle or the space station or visiting the moon for a little bit. If we're talking about people being on, say, Mars or the moon or some asteroid somewhere or a floating space station for years, or decades, or generations, we have to solve a lot of problems. One of the ways space can kill you is exposure to vacuum. Obviously, we have to have sealed spaces if we're out in vacuum or in a really thin environment. Decompression sickness, nitrogen gets into your blood. We have to have not only a sealed space, but we have to have careful control of the gases in that space. Big, huge one, we have to protect humans and animals and crops and everything from radiation and equipment from radiation. Other places than Earth don't have this nice, friendly atmosphere protecting us. So we may need to be underground. We may need to come up with other ways to protect ourselves and our environments from space radiation, which can cause cancer, it can cause reproductive issues. We need to deal with the problems of low gravity. When low gravity is bad for our bones, it's bad for our muscles, it's bad for our vision, it's probably bad for our brains, but we haven't really seen long-term effects yet, so it's hard to tell what it does exactly. Our circulatory systems are designed to work in gravity, and when we don't have gravity, we get lots of fluid pooling up in our faces and very little down in our legs because we're built to counteract the gravity. And if we have emergency medical care that's needed in space, how the heck do you do surgery when the blood and the organs keep floating out? Like, this is a real problem. They've done a little bit of research with pig corpses on the Vomit Comet, operating on pigs to see how would this work. And when you start thinking about how all of that would affect reproduction, gestation and childbirth and child development, we have no idea how any of that is going to be affected. Did you want to talk about any of that, Tor? Comments, knowledge you have about that?
Absolutely. And this gets into the space cowboy or girl mythology, that radiation is severely downplayed and they downplay all the risks because, hey, we're just out there to go to the moon and back and, we can tough it out. The truth is, if you are on the space station, when you sleep, you see these blue flashes in your eye as highly charged electrons and protons whiz through your body. You get about the same level of radiation if you're sleeping next to a reactor. I mean, not away, away from the reactor. I mean, like inside the reactor. So the whatever NASA says we can handle the radiation, nobody in their right mind would put themselves through that kind of radiation, even for a year. And the space station is below the Van Allen belts. They get a reduced dose because the magnetic field causes the charged particles to go around them. But you get outside
Mars
of that,
and the moon have no magnetosphere.
Yeah, once you get outside of that, it gets very hot, becomes somewhere a black hole formed and sent out some cosmic rays from hell.
Yeah.
And weightlessness, if you are weightless for a year, your bones are never the same. Your bones demineralize. Your muscles atrophy. And they talk about the recovery time is a function of how long you're in space. You just simply say by the time they get to Mars, they won't be able to stand up. Mm-hmm. Even on a Mars gravity.
It's going to be a one-way trip for these people, right? There's no way people are going to ever come home to Earth because Earth is never going to have been home for them. They're going to have developed without the gravity, and heck, without all of our germs and things in our atmosphere. So yeah, we may need to create underground environments for this to even be survivable for human beings. And we really have no idea about it for long-term generational effects. And one of the things that leads to is if we've got conditions that are going to lead to a lot of abnormalities in development, which Space does seem to, for the animal research we have done, we've got all kinds of abnormalities being much, much more common. Whether that's due to the radiation or due to the less gravity or due to the stress of the environment, like we haven't really teased all these things apart yet. But if we have those effects on humans, as we probably would, and we're going to be out in an environment where we don't have like the massive resources of Earth for medical care and child care and things like that, we're kind of encouraging an environment where maybe we just kill off the kids that aren't healthy. That's not a great thing to be setting ourselves up for as the beginning of a human culture, right? It's like if we want to set up some kind of a utopia, maybe we should not start it off by going, let's send a bunch of people to a place where a whole bunch of their children are disabled and they can't afford to take care of them. That's not a great start. So that would be an argument for taking a lot longer to think through and research the life support and medical concerns, and to develop the technological ability to send enough people in a short time that we can really establish a society with a strong base, so that we don't have space cowboys and their disabled babies trying to wing it. We have a whole society that can support whatever the difficulties medically end up being. Shall we go on to the habitats? How the heck do we create a habitat for humans? So when we talk about space settlements, we're talking about any place that's off Earth, right? Some kind of an environment that can support human life long term that is not on Earth. So what are our options? We got the moon, we got Mars, could we set up a long-term space station somewhere, some big rotating Deep Space Nine type thing? And then we've got like some places you probably wouldn't want to live, like on an asteroid. Maybe we want to mine asteroids, but it would not be a great place to live probably. Again, we have not done a lot of research here. The best research we have is probably from Biosphere, which was on Earth and was not well sealed, and there are all kinds of issues with that. And yet, it's the best information we have about creating a sealed environment that can support life on any kind of a scale larger than, a little space capsule or something. You want to talk about our options there, Tor? I think you had some great ideas to talk about.
Yeah, this is probably the largest of my contributions, because I'm really going to explore the option they didn't talk about. Mm-hmm. And that is, why don't we grab a near-Earth asteroid? There's one literally whizzing by the Earth every year. They're just piles of rubble. This is one that they actually documented. It had these characteristics. It's called dimorphos. Its dimensions are, as you see, 177 meters by 174 by 116 meters. In other words, it would fit inside of a stadium easily. And what can you do with that? You do what spiders do. You send robots up, and they can turn any material. They just essentially melt it and turn it into a string, very much like a spider, and you wrap it up. You hollow out the middle, you make a tube out of it, because what you do by getting this mass is you get radiation shielding. To get the equivalent radiation level that we have on Earth, you need 30 feet of material, 10 meters. And maybe you get down to 10 feet. It's still a lot better than what they have right now, which is almost nothing. The second is, this is a guy that made a Lego out of lunar material. The synthesized, could they 3D print a Lego? And the answer is yes. So this material is workable. And I got this off the internet. It's a lousy version of it, but if you want something much shorter and fatter, but the idea is the same. You're going to turn an asteroid into a tube, and it spins so you have artificial gravity. And you can do this all remotely from robots and from Earth, because all you've done is take that thing, get it close to Earth in some sort of orbit, so you can communicate it to it, and the robots do the rest. So you're not risking anybody to get up there. You can communicate almost real time, because it's only like a 2 or 3 second delay before you get to your item. You can almost do real time feedback. It's not like it's in a remote place. You don't have a gravity well like the moon, and you end up with a shuttle. And it's big enough in the inside for people, And they know from orbital characteristics that you just simply nudge this very gradually over time. You get a slingshot effect. You can take this to wherever you want to go. You need a bus, and you need a bus that has artificial gravity and radiation shielding. Because once you have that, you can safely go to all these places without destroying your body or radiating yourself. Because it's just, I mean, journalists talk about these things because these space cowboys want to make it seem reasonable. But it's a death trip. I'd rather live in Chernobyl.
Yeah,
And
so
then,
this seems like it solves a couple of the major life support problems. If we've got gravity and we've got radiation shielding, then it seems a lot more plausible to have humans living in something longer term. But we're also assuming here that we can have some way to capture a passing asteroid without accidentally crashing it into Earth or messing up our own orbit or something. So I think we do have a long way to go before we'd be able to do that. How do you even research that? How do we figure out how to do that?
just recently, they crashed a 1,000-pound satellite into an asteroid, a near-Earth asteroid, to see how much it would deflect the orbit, and it slowed it down by 32 minutes, which is substantial. Because unlike Earth, if you give a shove in space, it is a pure kinetic relationship. There's no friction, there's no wind resistance, there's nothing. It's literally you could push a ship in space because it's your mass and you're thrust against a larger thing. So if you get up, but they know that they have ion drives. They have a bunch of solar panels and an ion drive, and they can just vaporize the material, which is essentially silicon and oxygen, and spit it through a magnetic field. It gives a small thrust, like 1/10 of a pound, but you add that up over the space of a year, it's a lot. And
You're
so you
not
can
losing any of it to friction, yeah.
right. And so you just nudge this into a gentle orbit around the Earth, and you gradually lower it till, I mean, the only thing you're going to hit in a circular orbit around the Earth is the moon. That's your safety. And you just simply nudge it so it's close enough to the Earth that you can communicate to it.
Of course, if you
Because
do hit the moon, now you may have destabilized the moon's orbit, and that's a huge danger too. So I
oh
think
no,
that this is something we'd want to enter into awfully carefully.
these are tiny. These are less, as you saw on that, it's 177 meters, like 300 feet wide.
It'd just be
You
another
don't need
crater if we
anything
screwed
bigger than
up.
that. I mean, the moon can take something 100 miles in diameter and still not deflect its orbit.
All right. Let's talk about the legal and governmental and economic side of this. What the existing space law, people sometimes don't realize that there is actually existing space law. The way you hear Musk or Bezos talk about it, they sound like they're just making stuff up, and well, sometimes they are. So let's talk a little bit about the Outer Space Treaty and what it says, what it doesn't say. Did you want to talk about that, Tor, or should I go into that side?
You could dive into it, but essentially Russia and China don't count.
Yeah. Yeah, according to the US, nobody else counts. So what we've got right now is the Outer Space Treaty. That's like a shortening of its name. It's not the full name. But the Outer Space Treaty was created during the Cold War as kind of a compromise so that neither the US nor the USSR could take advantage too fast. Basically, it was a way not of allowing cooperation, but of kind of holding each other at bay a little bit. And it's not very detailed at all. It's actually really vague, and so different countries have interpreted it different ways, and it hasn't been really well tested yet. It's gonna be as we get more and more technologically advanced, and we have even private companies, private citizens going, "Oh, I'm gonna try this." We're gonna end up testing how this is applied. But basically what it says right now, and this is agreed on by what is it, 112 countries or something. Not all of them, but it does, yeah, currently ratified by 112 nations. So not everybody's agreed to it, but it is actually in effect now. And it does include all of the nations that currently have space capability. But this agreement has not changed since, what was it, 1967? Yeah, 1967. So obviously a lot's changed then, both politically and technologically. And what it basically says is you can't have weapons of mass destruction in space. You can't have off-world military bases or forts. You can't claim territory in space. Most of these terms are not defined. Space is not defined, whether it starts at the Kármán line where planes don't work and you have to switch to rockets. That's one common interpretation. Some people would define it as low down as 20 kilometers. Some balloons go higher than that. Some people say several thousand kilometers. We've seen arguments for defining it different ways. And so there's no universal agreement on which interpretation is actually, which should apply to the Outer Space Agreement. So that's kind of a problem with it. Any attempts to make it more specific have failed because somebody or other wouldn't ratify them. So we have this problem. We have an agreement in place, but nobody agrees on what it means or how to make it more specific. Another term that has not been defined in there is what a weapon of mass destruction is. Is an asteroid that you can deflect into another country a weapon of mass destruction? Is a satellite that doesn't have weapons on it but can knock out other satellites with an electric pulse, is that a weapon of mass destruction or not? Oh, we didn't mean to do that. It was just an accident. Our satellite blew up. Was that a weapon of mass destruction? We don't have definitions. And as far as military bases or forts, can't have those, but you can have a scientific station that happens to be manned entirely with military personnel. You can't claim territory, but you can have a long-term base somewhere where you're doing scientific research. You can use territory. You just can't claim that you own it. So all of these things are really vague, and it would be easy for a country or even a private corporation or individual to go, oh no, I'm totally in compliance with the Outer Space Treaty. I interpret it this way. You want to interpret another way? Let's test it in international court and see whose interpretation is favored. Once you've established a base somewhere, it's easier to simply violate it. Who's going to stop you once you're really there and established? All of this vagueness means that it could actually lead to a higher likelihood of war between nations to have space settlement going on, because there are disagreements about how to use those off-world resources and territories, and the possibility of having military advantages either on the off-world place or like aimed at Earth. Comments on that, Tor?
Yeah, from a geopolitics is probably the best view of this. The 1967 treaty was to prevent nuclear weapons in space, which they would be essentially, we could orbit them over your country and drop them at will. We could do electromagnetic pulses to wipe out your electrical grid and your computers and everything. And everybody basically said we don't want that. So they formed an agreement. Now you have Russia that is thoroughly occupied in a Ukraine war and is probably losing it. They can't get out of it. They can't settle for peace. They're kind of trapped. And the likelihood they're going to be launching anything into space anytime soon is probably a big old round zero. Then you have China that put up a lander on the moon, but that was mainly a publicity stunt to say, hey, ignore all the problems in China. You can look at this thing we put on the moon.
Well, as if Sputnik and Apollo weren't essentially political stunts too. All of our space program really has been signaling.
Right. So if you get it, that if this is all for consumption of people on the earth to feel confident that their government is powerful and we are innovative and we have high technology, fine. You can stick your probe on whatever you want. Just don't stick it next to ours. But when you get into getting people to settle in space, well, that's a whole different deal. And nicely, it's not covered by any treaty. You basically just go out there. Because if you're at risk to somebody, then they care. But if you're just out there, yeah, fine, that's your thing.
Well, there are issues about how space resources can be used. Because currently you're like allowed to collect samples, but there are different interpretations about who space stuff belongs to. Basically, there's a three. There's it belongs to whoever finds it. That's kind of a frontier model, and it's not supported by the Outer Space Treaty. There's a it doesn't belong to anybody now, and it belongs. It would belong to. Basically, there's either it doesn't belong to anybody, it belongs to the country that finds it, or it belongs to humanity, and so you need humanity's permission to use it. And a model for the moon that would have used that latter one did not succeed. We had what was it, find it here. Remember the name of the moon agreement?
Don't be bad on the moon.
Yeah, I guess it was just called the Moon Agreement. Only a few countries agreed to it, so it's technically in place. But since none of the countries with space capability agreed to it, it really doesn't have any power whatsoever. It would have said the moon is a community resource for all of humanity. Nobody gets to own it or develop it. And in some ways, it just reproduced what the Outer Space Treaty already said, but it went into more detail and was more specific with its definitions, and almost nobody agreed to it. So far, we have not been able to nail down what the Outer Space Treaty actually means in practice. And different countries have different ideas about what it should mean. Nobody quite wants to limit themselves, and nobody quite wants to let other countries have more freedom. So we're kind of stuck with this very vague definition for now. Okay, we're about at the end here, so let's kind of wrap this up with some general principles. Tor, what do you want to leave people with for impressions of practicality and what's a good idea on space settlement?
I want to leave you with the notion that it is possible. We have these wonderful emerging technologies. We didn't have computer simulations. So how do you land something on an asteroid with almost no gravity? We could simulate it now. We could simulate it very accurately. We have AI-driven design. The case of that rocket engine. My gosh, you did 2 weeks for that. We have 3D metal printing, or all this that Lego you saw in space. That's all 3D printed. So where before we had to assemble these things, you had to use the techniques of metalworking that we build ships out of. And so everybody said, well, you need to melt it, you need to press it out, you need to form it into your shapes, you need to weld it. The answer is none of that. You need to 3D print it. So almost everything in space is going to be 3D printed. It's very simple. You just melt it, you turn it into a thread, you feed it into something that's going to print it. And how hard is that to do? I mean, spiders do that. We just need to copy them. And then you get into, once you have a means of moving people around, you can go off to even better places. Vesta is one of the biggest asteroids, but it's tiny compared to the moon. Now, tiny is good if you're starting out because you have very low gravity. Low gravity means you can get there and get away from it without a huge cost. You don't need big rocket engines. You don't need anything like that. And if you don't go to Vesta, Vesta is kind of blurry, but it's a little bit farther than Mars. And this matters to say the farther away you are from the sun, the weaker the sunlight. So around Vesta, you'd have to set up solar panels with a bunch of mirrors to concentrate the sunlight. And then you get into these other asteroids. You get into one series is about 1,000 miles in diameter. It has more water on it in the form of ice than all the oceans on Earth, quite a bit more. As I mentioned, Vesta is big. It has noticeable gravity, about less than a tenth of what we have, like 1% of what we have. I don't remember the number, but I'm fond of 9 Metis, which is about the same distance to Earth. And the 16 Psyche is the core of an old planetoid that got smashed up. Both of these are very iron rich. And iron is great to build, rotating cylinders and habitats and shielding and all the good things you make a civilization out of in space. And my point is, unless you go out and do this and build up your infrastructure on these places, going to Mars is kind of a waste of time. You build this stuff first and then goes to Mars, you can go in style.
Yeah, I think that's great, Tor. I think the rocket technology is very exciting. We've got things changing fast. And I think you're right that we need to put more into closer by attempts than trying to reach out to Mars at this point in our development. We need to work on the rocket technology, but even more so as the Weinersmiths keep coming back to, we need to work on all the other stuff. We need to figure out the social technologies. We need to figure out the medical pieces of it before we try anything that's going to be long-term settlement off Earth. So we need to do like on Earth experiments, low Earth orbit experiments, experiments on asteroids. We need to figure all this stuff out and then make a big effort to send a whole bunch of people to Mars, not try to do it like one person at a time like cowboys. So I think we're pretty much in accord. I really strongly recommend that everybody actually read A City on Mars. There's way more content in it than we could cover in this talk, and it's pretty funny. Even though it's a serious topic, it's also got lots of fun content, cartoons, things like that. So, any final comments, Tor?
A lot of the stories in A City on Mars are predicated on that they're doing this in low or no gravity, and they're in a high radiation environment. And I would never allow that. The whole premise of my idea is you build a shuttle that has sufficient shielding and artificial gravity. So this practicing on Earth and, where they do the parabolic flights and what it's like to do, operate on a pig in space. Come on, that makes no sense to me. I want gravity. I mean, I wouldn't endorse anybody going into space for long term without gravity. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
It certainly makes a lot more sense if we can set up environments that have both the radiation shielding and the gravity, because those are big problems for human survival. All right. I think it's time to turn this over for discussion. I think people have lots to say and ask on this one.